So today I want to go over tiling using a digital image. And in this case, we're going to look at how to use our 5-step value scale. And I've decided I want to paint this image for this demonstration. So I pulled this up on my desktop. And what I'm going to do first is we're going to mark it up with a grid. But even before that, we're going to rotate it upside down. And we're going to paint it this way because it's a little easier to see the image upside down. Then we're going to put a grid on it and we're going to choose a box. And I have made it red, but I also have made the box edges pretty thick. And I'm using this program called Preview. So then I put my box in and I'm thoughtful about where I want to go here. One of the things that people do is they'll cut the bottom off too much. And in a case like this, the lower quarter of the image is probably the most important part of the painting. So let's leave that on. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some lines for the middle, and this straightens them out for me, and through the two middles. Oops, that one is a little too curvy. And we're going to place them in the true center of this image. You can do this in a lot of different ways, but I just number them. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is you want to grab some screenshots that have nothing in them. And I have set up a little group of screenshots in my tiling on the screen folder. Let's see if I can make it more apparent. So I have some screenshots that have no image in them. And I'm going to open them up and I'm going to place them on the image, right? So when I am tiling, I'm going to cover parts that I don't want to look at, and then I'm going to only look at one part at a time. So we're going to do that next. So I'm going to take this screenshot, and these are just basically empty images. And we're going to work in this manner. And I could measure off the screen, but what I'm going to do is actually trace. I'm using my piece of paper, I'm putting on top of my screen, and I'm going to trace the outline of this image onto the piece of paper. Actually, I need to make it a little smaller to do that. So now I can see through the paper. And this is just so that I get the proportion of the box correct the first time I do it. And I could also measure it out. Now I'm dividing my square into quadrants. Okay, so we have our value scale that has been calibrated. And I actually took a little the edge off my value scale so I can put this right on top of different pieces of paper and really see how they compare. Now, one thing that I wanted to show you is this, my palette is actually a mid-tone, and you can see that that 3 is pretty much the same as my palette. And that is actually done on purpose so that I know what a mid-tone value is. So let's put our white in our palette and a little bit more of it. And if you notice, I'm mixing this value a little lighter than the mid-tone on my palette. And that's because there's this thing called a drying shift in gouache, especially for lighter colors will dry darker. So let's just do a test. I'm going to do a test right here. I'm going to make a little puddle, add a little water to my mixture. And then I'm going to do a test. And the way I'm going to do this test is I'm going to just take that mixture, I'm going to rub it into the paper a little bit so it dries faster. And then I want to dry it. And ideally, and you can see already, this does look darker than that. Ideally, I want my 3 to be the same, this 3 and this 3. And when I look at this is too light, just tiny bit too light. So I'm going to just add a tiny bit more of dark paint to it. Set up really good. All right. And with an image like this that we are copying, my advice to you is to paint the entire background first and then tile over. So right now I'm mixing up the mid-tone value, and I'm going to cover the entire painting with my 3. And this is my 3 value, and it's going on wet, and it will dry down. So this layer will take the longest to dry. And again, I'm going to bring out my trusty hairdryer. And I know it's drier because it's no longer glossy or shiny. And then I'm just going to check again to see how I feel about the value. And I think it looks okay. The next thing that I'd want to do is I want to regrid out my quadrants. And I just want to tell you that when you watch me do this, my video is backwards, meaning it's a mirrored image to what I'm looking at. So it may look like I'm doing this in mirror. I'm mirroring it, but I'm not. I'm actually copying the same image. And here's my palette. And that's my resource. My reference is on the screen. And I'm going to put my screenshots on top of the image that I'm painting. Like this. All right. And the idea is to paint everything I see in the correct value. And if I get rid of all my mid-tone, that's all right, because I'm going to leave my mid-tone alone on the paper. So that I'm ready to go. Okay. So now I'm going to put my entire attention on this image. And what I first am going to do is I'm going to lay in the darker values. And I'm not going to start with black because I want to leave black for special things. So I'm actually going to go into my 4. And I'm going to paint the negative shape around the goat's head. And I'm going to paint it pretty loosely, because I really don't know what it looks like yet. So I'm kind of figuring it out as I go. And then I know that there's a dark part on top of the head. I'm going to wipe my brushes off and I'm going to go to my light areas, not my white areas, but my 2s. Fixing a few things. Then I'm going to go to white on my 1. And the only places that are really white in this quadrant are top areas. And that's because the light, the illumination is coming from above and it's hitting planes that are perpendicular to the light beam. The rest of the planes will be 2s or 3s or 4s, but not those ones. Perpendicular, but also turn away from the light source. So the little the under cheek here is a shadow, and it can be as dark as the shadow behind the head. So we're going to do that. And then there's another shadow. It's not as dark, but let's just call it a 4 right here. The inside of the ear has a little darker area. And now I'm bringing up 5 because I want to go in and start really making those higher contrast areas, which usually happen right next to our 1s. And sometimes inside the 4s, this little chin and the little nose. Sometimes even go back into my midtones at this point. And then just finally, let's be a little bolder with our black, with our 5. And I can see in this corner, this side of this whole form is much darker than the other side. So I'm going to add that in. Now, I'm looking at the image and I know there's a little shadow right there. I'm going to add in once I get to where I want to leave it, I move on to the next quadrant. So let's look at two quadrants at the same time. So we're going to look at 2 and 1 at the same time. And that means we're going to use quadrant 1 to help us see and draw quadrant 2. So I'm going to make what I'm doing a little bigger on screen. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is look at 2, and we're going to take some of the quadrant 2. So we're here. I do like putting the 2 in there. And and it goes on and it almost looks the same as a 3, but remember it's going to dry down lighter. We put that in, and then I'm going to go, I think definitely I'm going to go to 4. I need more contrast, especially at the bottom. I'm going to my lights. Okay, so I just rinsed my water out. And I'm going from the dark values to the light values now. So my brush is cleaned out, my water's cleaned out. I've added more white in my palette. So let's look where that might go. All right, so remember we talked about the lighting. The lighting's coming from the top, moving down across this sculpture. So the top of the goat is going to have that light value. The top of the legs of the goat are going to have a 1 value. So any plane or set of planes that are perpendicular to that light beam coming down from the top will get like this little plane here. Now the belly is going around, so it's going to go from this 2, I mean, sorry, from the 1 to the 2, and then down into a darker value, mid-tone, and then, so I'm going to start layering a gradient actually. So that's my 2. That's my 3. 4. Looks a little dark for me. Actually, it's just a little too big of a shape. Getting close. And then I'm going to have, there's a little reflected light right down here. I'm going to put that in. There's this detail here, which goes all the way up into this part. I want to paint these little bright areas and dark areas underneath the hooves. Actually, I'm going to paint the dark areas and then paint it a little lighter. And these are shadows from the legs. I'm going to actually pull some of this darkness down here too. So let's move on to quadrant 3 and see if I can set this up. So we're gonna go from, we have a midtone, so we're gonna go to our darks first, and we're gonna use the 4. So I don't have a lot of 4 left over, so I'm gonna mix up a 4. I'm gonna be generous with my mixing right now. Then I'm gonna mix up a 2. We're on to quadrant 3. And coming from here There's actually, this is my way. Oh, look at that shape. And I should be covered this over because it's a little, that kneecap is distracting me. You know, I love that kneecap. It's not going to help me in this part of the painting. Right. So my 4s are in, and now I want to go into my 2s to lighter. So I really want to clean my brushes off. Then after I put in the 2s, I'm really bold. I'm going to go right to the 1s and lay in the 1s where I really see the most brightness from the light above hitting the sculpture. And there's a very narrow little line right here of white. 1. Now I'm going to go back with my black. And again, when you look for black, and what you'll see it right next to white. Now there's some problems with this leg, so I'm gonna fix it. This is where I'm using really small marks, very little water. I see a few more things I wanted to. And then I'm going to look at the entire top next. Just compare, contrast, see if there's something I can add. Ooh, there's so many good things between that, on that line like that. There's some darks in there. And then finally, let's just look at our last quadrant, which has nothing in it except a kneecap. And this is the beauty of tiling, is you do a lot of hard work, and then the gift of a pretty abstract one is a pretty nice gift. So going in with my 4, and I do need to mix up more 4s, and I'm going to get that kneecap right where it needs to go. You also notice by the end of the rotation around your quadrants, you're painting bigger, bolder, looser. because you're more confident. The ones first. And this isn't quite the right shape. So. And let's look at it as a whole. I also want to add these pads here. Okay, I don't know what they are, but I want to add them. Really go in on my highlights. And at some point, you might want to even bring your threes back in. So I want to thin out my ear. Something going on here that I really need to fix. But whether I'll be able to fix it today or tomorrow, don't know. I'm going to move it a little darker. Okay, so that concludes tiling, the black and white, digital reference. And this is your practice. So practice, and I'll see you soon.